Have you ever been on a live gig and all of a sudden got called on to play a drum solo, only to find that you weren't quite clear on what to do and you were under the gun and you ran out of ideas and what you were playing wasn't exactly the ideas that you wanted to express? Well, if you've been in that situation, this video is going to tackle how to overcome that obstacle. That's what's coming up next, so let's get to it. So we've all been there, right? You're playing a gig, you got a groove going, and all of a sudden the band leader turns around to you and says, "Okay, Jay, solo." And you're like, "Oh no, what do I do?" So you start playing. And suffice to say, the stuff that comes out doesn't really reflect what you want to express on the drums. Basically, it's like getting caught with your pants down. And if you're not a great soloist, this has definitely happened to you. And if you are a great soloist, I guarantee this has happened to you at some point in the past before you reach that level. So basically, don't feel bad because we've all been there. All right, so how do you get over this? How do you get over this obstacle of just being able to play a drum solo on the spot, on the fly, make it sound interesting, make it sound captivating? I'm telling you right now, nothing is worse than a boring drum solo. A drum solo where you're just not saying anything. It is like painful to watch. Now, I've seen some arena drummers get away with this by having lights and pyrotechnics and all kinds of things happening while they're playing something simple. They're creating the show that way instead of with their technique. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you are in a small jazz club and you see a little old guy on a 4-piece kit and he's just blowing away the room. He's got every eye on him and every jaw on the floor. I don't know about you, but I'm more interested in being that guy. So here's how I break it down to students. Now, this is assuming that they've kind of got the mental game together and they have a good sense of their technique. So I'm already assuming that that part of it is kind of together. And I've done other videos addressing how to get to that level. But assuming that you have a good understanding of some vocabulary and you understand mentally where you need to be when you're sitting down to play a drum solo, what do you actually do? How do you actually break down the anatomy of what you're trying to play and do it on the fly? Well, the way I do it is I separate the idea of soloing into two concepts. That's right, there's only two things I think about. And when I say think about, I mean I think about it way back of the brain. It's not something that I consciously think about. It's something that I practice a lot, and from practicing a lot, it's kind of molded itself into my playing. And those two concepts are coasting and static licks. First, let's talk about coasting, because that's something I feel like a lot of drummers don't have a handle on. It's like rolling down a hill. It's like sitting on a bike, taking your feet off the pedals, and just coasting. I never run out of things to say because I'm really saying the same thing over and over again, but I'm putting it in different positions, in different patterns, different permutations, and making it sound like I have an endless amount of vocabulary. So it's the idea that you set some kind of a rule, and inside of that rule, you create melody. Now, any drummer that studies with me knows that the way to create melody on the drums is through accents. So if you understand your accents produce melody. The accents there create the melody, not the rhythm. The rhythm is just, but as soon as you add that accent, that's how you get your melody happening. Now, this idea of accenting and creating melody is what you use to coast. So here's the rule. I'm going to say that the rhythm is 16 notes. 1 E-enda, 2 E-enda, 3 E-enda, 4 E-enda. Inside of that rhythm, I'm just going to play accents in random positions and create melody. That's what I mean by coasting. I can do that forever. I will never run out of ideas because all I'm doing is I'm singing a melody. And as I make that melody happen, I could just keep on going. Just like you're on a bicycle rolling down the hill with your feet off the pedals. You're just letting the momentum drive you forward. Now, if you practice the idea and you could do it at all different tempos, you could do it nice and fast. That also means you could do it inside different rhythms. You don't have to just use 16 notes. You could do it inside of triplets, say 16-note triplets. So coasting, if I broke it down, is taking the idea of all your different rhythms, all your entire table of time, if you will, and being able to manipulate accents over those rhythms. And that would be coasting at its barest bones, at its most basic level. Now, where it really gets cool and where the vocabulary really starts taking off is if you start adding sticking rules to that. Now, what is a sticking rule? So if you know anything about sticking, it's the orders of rights and lefts. On the drum set, I also include feet and changing the sound source. So even though this is alternating sticking, if I do this, that's going to change the sticking. If I add the feet, that's going to change the sticking. By setting sticking rules over your rhythm and accent pattern, you could create all kind of coasting situations. And what's great about these coasting situations is it creates a vibe, and it's a set of vocabulary that you never run out of. You'll never be in that situation where you have to play a solo, but you got caught with your pants down because you weren't sure what to do, or your brain starts racing. Oh, that lick that I practiced, now's the time that I can do the Bonham thing, there it is. You could always fall back on your coasting ideas, and it gives you time just to sit down and express yourself. And it never gets boring because all you have to do is change the sticking rule. If you change the rule, it changes the entire vibe of what you're doing, even though what you're saying is pretty much the same thing. Now that's kind of hard to understand, so let's demonstrate a little bit. So for the first sticking rule, I'm going to set the rhythm. And the rhythm is going to be 16 notes. So 1E into 2E into 3E into 4E into 1. Now to that rhythm, I'm going to add accents, giving me louder and softer notes. Now you could just improvise like that, just make it up, or what I like to do when I'm practicing is use something called a note source. And a note source, something like this, gives you just a source of random notes, just like what it's called. And basically, if your reading is good, you read down the page and you apply the sticking rule to those notes. Wherever the notes tell you to play, that's where you put your accent. Everything else in between, where you're holding and where you're resting, those become the filler. That's what you fill in with your sticking. Okay, now to practice this. The first thing I'm going to do is establish a tempo. So this is 100 BPM on the metronome. Based on that, I'm going to find my 16th note. 1E into 2E into 3E into 4E into. Now while I'm playing the 16 notes, I'm going to read through the music and make the accents where the note source tells me to play. Alternating and accenting. 1, 2, ready, go. 1E into 2E into 4E into E into 2E into 3E into 4. 1E into 2E into 3E into 4E into 1 and 2E into E into 4E into 1. And that's how you would do alternating accents. But what if I wanted to change that sound a little bit? What if I wanted to make it sound a little more exciting? Well, then I would change the sticking rule. So now this time, instead of just playing alternating 16 notes, what I'm going to do is play doubling 30-second notes. So I'm going to roll instead of playing single strokes. Now for the accents, I'm going to leave those as one single 16th note. So everything else that's holding and resting is going to be 30-second notes doubling, except for the accents. Those are going to be one solid 16th note. What that's going to do, it's going to leave a little 30-second note hold after every single accented note. So this sticking rule I call rolling accents. And here's what that sounds like at 100 on the metronome. 1, 2, ready, go. Now notice, I'm reading the exact same line on the exact same note source. But that sounded totally different, even though I'm reading and playing, interpreting the same exact line of music. And because I changed that sticking rule, it made it sound like I was doing something completely different. Let's go ahead and change that rule again. This time, instead of playing rolling in between and accenting the notes, I'm going to roll the note. So every accent is going to be a double or a diddle. Ready, go. So notice that gives me an opposite feeling of what I just did. It's slow again, but then that accent has got the double to it. What if we put a flam on the accent? So every accent is going to have a flam on top of it. Ready, go. Now you notice that gives me a dirtier or angrier sound. You also notice that I haven't moved around the kit. I haven't touched any other sound except for the snare drum. So that's not to say that you can't start adding feet to the rules, you can't start moving to the different sound sources. That's going to totally change the vibe. So to quickly demonstrate that, let's go back to alternating accents, the very first one, and I'm going to adjust that sticking rule a little bit. So right hand accents are going to go to the floor tom. Left hand accents are going to go to the high rack tom. All the unaccented notes are going to stay on the snare drum. Let's see what that sounds like. Ready, go. So let's try that again, same idea, but with the rolling accents. The idea of rolling and doing single shots that way. Ready, play. 1, 2, and a 3, and a 4, and a 3, and a 2, and a 3, and a 4, and a 1, and a 2, and a 4, and a 2, and a 3, and a 4, and a 1. Slamming the accent. 1, 2, ready, go. Now, if you notice on that one, I opted to split the flam across the snare drum and the toms. Okay, so now that we kind of covered the idea of coasting in a very basic level, let's just demonstrate what that sounds like if you're going to do a quick drum solo. I'm not using a note source this time, I'm just going to do it out of my head and just sing a melody. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you notice when I do that, I could just kind of riff and just play, and I never run out of ideas, and I just keep on moving. Now, I'm not doing much to really be emotional here. I'm just kind of flying from sticking idea, sticking idea, sticking idea, and I'm just jumping back and forth. But essentially, I'm just saying that same thing. I'm playing those same melodies over and over again because there's only so many accents I can do, but the sticking choices in between those accents are infinite. And that's what makes it sound like you're doing something different. So it's almost akin to saying the same sentence or the same phrase, but in all different languages. Very cool trick, and that's the way to fill in the body or the meat of your drum solo. So the bad news is that you're never done with this. You're never gonna say, oh, I know every single sticking rule I could possibly know. That's impossible. And the good news is there's so many choices that you'll always have your own fingerprint if you develop some interesting and unique sticking rules. And I'm always super curious to see what other drummers come up with. It's a great thing to be able to steal some of these rules from other players. So if you have a really cool sticking rule and you want to share it, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to check it out. Okay, so let's go to the other side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum, unfortunately, is the idea that most drummers stick to when it comes to playing a solo. And this is the idea of a static lick or a static fill. A static phrase. Now I say static because static is something that stands alone. It's something that doesn't move. It's stationary. It's one thing or one idea. So an example of a static lick would be something like a drum rudiment. For example, a paradiddle. That's just the pattern of right, left, left, left. And that doesn't change. You don't deviate from that. The accents don't move. It just stays as a static pattern. And if I practice that and get it really fast, you could set that as a sticking rule and coast with something like that. So that's something that you can use as a sticking rule. I'm going to play paradiddles and then make the accents. But if I was just to keep that into one pattern and not change it, that would be a static lick. For example, taking a paradiddle and voicing it like this. Now notice I was playing that in this around the drums type of pattern. And if you practice that and get that to move quickly, you can insert that into different rhythms and that becomes a static lick. Now what's crazy about static licks is that there's even more choices. There's even more combinations of static licks that you can do. And again, the permutations and combinations come into like the billions. It's like the equivalent of lottery numbers. That's how many variations of static licks you can create. So the challenge becomes, with so many billions of combinations, what do you practice? Where do you start? How do you narrow this down to something you can use? Well, in drumming, yes, we have things like rudiments, and that kind of gives you some very common static licks that you can practice. But you don't have to stop at the rudiments. You could start getting creative, especially on the drum set when it comes down to sound sources. For example, alternating doesn't seem like a static lick, but if you move it in a certain pattern around the drums, say like this, that now becomes a static lick. And I'm just alternating. I'm not really doing anything special. But if you want to get fancy, you could really start messing with all the sound sources, substituting hands for feet, and then you come up with some really interesting ideas. They could also be different lengths. You could have a static lick that's one beat, like for example, a paradiddle. If you do two paradiddles, it's a 2-beat thing. You could make it a 2-beat phrase, you could make it a 4-beat phrase, you could make it a 9-beat phrase, you could make it a 12-beat phrase. Or you could do what I like to do, which is create small phrases, like say based on 6 or 8 or 4 notes, and then stack them. And when you do that, you come up with real cool static lick phrases. So what if I take that same exact pattern that I just played? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. Now I'm gonna take that and adjust the sticking a little bit. So instead of playing all singles, I'm going to change the snare drum part, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, into double strokes. So 1 on the floor tom, then all doubles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we would know that as either a 6-stroke roll or a paradiddle-diddle, depending on how you voice it in the rhythm. But that 6-note pattern feels like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right, left, left, right, right, left. Now the idea of sticking is not necessarily to change the sound, because whether I alternate or use the doubles, it's the same sound. Alternating, doubles. Alternating, doubles. So the reason you change it is because one way you can play a lot faster than the other way. So singles, now you can whip it out if you have good singles, but if I roll that, there's no contest. I could burn that. So now say I add that to the singles around the toms. I get that. Now that's a pretty fast lick, right? That sounds cool, but I'm still working my butt off getting around these drums with all those single strokes. So one thing I can do is add some feet in there. So I could substitute some feet instead of my hands. It'll take the workload off of all those single strokes. So what we have to deal with after this 6-stroke roll is these 6 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to replace 1 with a bass drum. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm also going to replace 6 with a bass drum. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now it's like I've taken those 6 notes and I've wrapped the toms up in a bass drum bracket. Bass, tom, 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 bass. Now this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, is very easy to do. That's a rudiment. We call that a single stroke 4. If you're older like me, it's called a 4-stroke rough. So a single stroke 4 is basically that. And we could burn that. And you could also move that across the toms. You can even go this way. Again, going back to that John Bonham fill. Now if I wrap that up with a bass drum in front and a bass drum in back, bass single stroke 4 bass. Bass single stroke 4 bass. Now let's stack that with the 6-stroke roll. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, bass single stroke 4 bass. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, bass single stroke 4 bass. I get stuck with this same lick that I was doing before, all single strokes. But now I have this. That I could do a lot faster. And I could burn it out. Now that would be the idea of a static lick. And depending on what rhythm I use that in, you could use it pretty much in any rhythm. It's going to either fly over the time and be like a permutation type of thing, or in triplets it'll fit right into the beat. So if I'm playing here, 1, 2, ready, go. Two, ready, and. very, very cool lick. And if you notice, it doesn't feel like I'm killing myself with single strokes. Not that that particular lick is wrong. That's just a different lick. And being able to play something like that brings a certain intensity. So sometimes you might want that physicality. You might want to feel like you're pushing and getting those single strokes to happen. That's fine too. But other times you want it to just feel effortless. Like you're just flying around the kit and it's just super smooth. That's where changing these sticking and developing these licks comes in. Now here's the most important thing I could probably tell you about static licks. Whenever you create something like I just created there, you need to write it down. I'll say that again. Make sure you write it down. I'm telling you right now, I've forgotten 10 times more static licks than I actually use in my current vocabulary. What ends up happening is you sit down to your kit, you start practicing, you start playing something, you come up with something cool, you figure it all out, you get good at it, then you forget to write it down. A couple of weeks goes by, you have no idea what you played. You'll never remember it. And it's okay, if you forget it, you know what? You just create a new one. It's not like there's not a billion of them to choose from, but sometimes it's a real loss when you have a good static lick and then you forget it. It's like the worst thing in the world. So I have a book literally filled front to back with all these different static licks. Now, a lot of drummers, especially if you see some of those gospel guys that are whipping around the kit, a lot of that stuff is static lick phrases that they've stacked and stacked and stacked and stacked, and they just have a million to go to. Every time they go to do it, they're stacking to different static licks. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine if you want to do that. The way I like to solo, because I don't want my brain running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, is I like to coast and then pepper in a static lick. This is something that you see some great drummers, if you listen to like Keith Carlock do a drum solo. And if you don't know Keith Carlock, you should check him out. Just Google him or YouTube him or something and check out the way he plays a drum solo. He does some beautiful, beautiful coasting. Sometimes his coasting centers more around a groove. Sometimes it centers more around a melody or a tom thing. But every now and then, he'll pepper in a static lick. One static lick I saw him do that I know he likes a lot is right, left, diddle, diddle, bass, bass. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if you kill that, you get that. So he'll be coasting. Then all of a sudden, he'll throw that in. And it'll just create this crazy energy. Now that's just one lick of a billion that the guy probably has under his hands. But again, it's something I saw, so I stole it. Which brings me to my next point. There's no such thing as owning your static licks. Steal them. If you see something you like, steal it. Never, never feel like, oh, that's that guy's thing. No. You see something that you like, that you see a drummer doing that inspires you, you take that lick, you put it in your pocket, and you make it your own. Steal like a thief. That's the way to get great at soloing. I guarantee you there's so many combinations of static licks that you're never going to wind up sounding just like that guy. But steal. Steal, 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 steal like a thief. I'm telling you, that's the way to do it. So that's the idea. So the idea is coasting, which is melody, and setting sticking rules to make it sound like you're saying different things without really saying anything different. And you could do this forever. Peppered in with static licks. So coasting, static, coasting, static, coasting, static. And that is how you build a drum solo without ever losing vocabulary or ever being caught with your pants down. So I'm Jay Fenichel. That wraps up this lesson. And remember to always practice with purpose. I hope you got something out of this lesson. If you dug it, do me a favor and like the video. Remember to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to try to come out with a new lesson at least once a week from now on. And subscribing is the way you stay in touch with me. So if you like this content, you like these lessons, please subscribe. Don't forget to do that. It's very important.